Hello and welcome back to another video on WD18, the Watford fan channel. And it's a very special video today. We're joined by none other than the Watford Observer's Andrew French. Andrew, how are you today, mate?
I'm very good, thanks, Sam. Good to see you both. I'm sure my sons wouldn't say there's anything special about having me on, but if it makes you happy, I'm happy.
I think the whole Watford community would probably disagree with you with that, Andrew.
Well, I live with my harshest critics live in the same house, so I'm well used to
it. We're also joined today by Charlie Zazera, becoming a bit of a regular on the channel now as well. Charlie, how are you?
Yeah, I'm all good, Sam. I'm waiting for my permanent contract. Still not in the post, but I'm excited about today's one. Speaking to Andrew, so hopefully we can get some good feedback and some good news about the club.
Yeah, so we got quite a lot to go through. Obviously, with the January transfer window happening at the moment, with it being Watford related as well, there's rumours flying out every 10 minutes pretty much as well. Incomings, outgoings, work permits, everything. So if you have a question for Andrew, then just please leave it in the chat down below and we'll get onto them at some point in the video. But we'll start off with just a few questions from both me and Charlie. Charlie, we've got a bit of a Word document in front of us with everything that we'll go through. So we'll take it in turns, Charlie, I think, with each question, if that's all right with you.
Yeah,
so I'll start off with we got an update today on Mateus Martins, who seems to have signed for Udinese, and he's now come on loan to Watford. Do you know anything sort of about why the club seem to have changed the way that the signings come about?
I don't think they've changed it, Sam. If you go back and read what they said, they were very careful in the words that they used. They talk about him having joined the club and that he would be registered in January. And I think when as someone who writes a lot, when I see particular choice of phrases, it's not that they're trying to hide anything. It's just that they're not quite sure how it's going to pan out. And I think from day one there was always the possibility that he would sign for Udinese and be loaned to us. There was still the chance that he would sign for us. But I think it was always heading in that direction. Why that is, I don't know. I don't think I'm not so Machiavellian to think that, it's a case of the Pozzos putting all their assets in one place that they can disappear over a hill one day. I think it's, there's lots of things in there, that there's money, there's loan spaces, there's football fair play rules. But I'm not perturbed or surprised that Martins is a loan deal. Put it this way, if we were to go up, that might change. We might get him for another season. In the same way that if we were to stay down, there's always a chance someone like Kamara could stay. I think so much depends on what division we're in. I think also, rival fans get very wound up by it, but it's not an uncommon thing to happen. I saw that Nottingham Forest have taken a player back from Olympiacos and sent him out to Blackpool. Don't see anybody moaning about that. Don't see Ian Holloway jumping up and down, calling us cheats and everything else.
He's somewhere.
He's somewhere. Yeah. The thing is, if we were breaking a rule, we would be punished. We're not breaking a rule. Whether you think it's moral, that's different. But while it's allowed, then I don't see the harm in it being exercised in the way that it is. Do I like the bigger picture of the way things operate? Maybe not. But if it means that we get access to players that we might not get access to, and it allows us to push on for promotion, that's a good thing. So in the short term, I'm not too worried about it. Longer term, it doesn't feel particularly comfortable. But I'm not surprised. And I don't think there's anything underhand there. I think it was just purely a case of the Pozzo families who own the two clubs wanted to look at the best way of doing it. So this is their idea of the best way.
Will Martins be available for the Blackpool game on Saturday?
That I don't know, because there is still work permits and international clearance. All I understand is, and I wouldn't claim to be an expert on football paperwork, but I know that since Brexit, and this isn't a political statement, but since Brexit, things have become much harder. So whereas in the past, if someone had, for instance, Ben Manga, having worked in Germany, would have been a shoo-in for a work permit under previous rules. It's much harder now because the fact he worked in Germany has no bearing on the decision. What they would look at is, we're looking to employ someone who's from Equatorial Guinea. Do we need that person in the country? So it would be the same with Martins. The fact that Martins is an under-20 international, the fact that he would score quite highly in terms of the points required for permits suggests that he'll get one. And the fact that he's in Spain, I think, would probably help as well. In Italy. But other than that, I can't say for certain whether he'll be available on Saturday, because, as I say, the rules and the work involved in getting a permit have got harder. It's not that he won't get one, and it's not that other players won't get one. It's just not the straightforward procedure. I think I was told it's gone from one form that you fill into 6. And if anyone's applied for a passport or a driving license in the last couple of years, it's slower than it ever was before. So will he be available Saturday? The fact the club haven't said he definitely is suggests to me that they don't know either. But hopefully by Friday, when I see Slaven, then we'll know a bit more.
Yeah, obviously we need him, and that kind of comes on to our next question about this ridiculous injury list that we've got. I'm not sure, Andrew, if you've ever seen one like this before, but I just wanted a bit of an update, if you knew anything, kind of do we know when Chowdhury, Louza, João Pedro are likely to be back, and do we know the severity of Keenan Davis's injury?
So Chowdhury was a name that Slaven mentioned after the cup tie at Reading as being someone that he thought would be available for Blackpool. And I was at the training ground today, and I didn't speak to Chowdhury, but I saw him there, and he was with the normal group of players that would suggest that he's back in the sort of first team fold. So I think, he's one that looks like he was going to come back. Of the others, there's been no mention that any others would be available for Saturday. Of the people you've talked about there, I mean, Louza, I was always told, it would be early February, so probably under a couple of weeks. And I was never quite sure whether that was early February playing or early February back in training, because there's a difference between the two. So the only one that I'm really anticipating being back on Saturday would be Chowdhury. I would think Kayambe is quite close, because he was only 4 or 5 weeks, and that was at the turn of the year. So he won't be that far away. But the way things tend to operate now is we get an update from the manager on Fridays. And for the last few weeks, we haven't sort of done individual players, because you could spend an hour doing that. But the ones like you that, I'll be asking about this week is obviously that Davis is pivotal to the way we play. So, yeah, I'll ask about that on Friday. But, the only one I think that has been mentioned that I'm sort of looking that would be available Saturday would be Chowdhury, which obviously does leave us with some gaps. But we might be surprised. There might be some more that I get told about on Friday.
Good stuff. And there should be more incomings coming in throughout the transfer window. We'll get into some specific players later on in the video. But do you know if there's any positions that the club is specifically targeting?
Well, that's where you've got a slight difference of opinion, I suppose, because Bilic has talked about wanting wingers and midfielders, and then after the Davis injury, he talked about a striker. What nobody knows, and I wouldn't be alone in not knowing, is how much of what Bilic wants fits in with how much of what Pozzo thinks he wants, or fits in with what Manga's gone out to look for. Now, I know Bilic has said that they talk and they work together, and I'm sure they do. But, reading between the lines, the fact that Slaven has been so clear in what he said he's looking for is a suggestion that, maybe he's worried that he's not going to get them, and he wants to get that first bid in. You've only got to look at it. We desperately need midfielders. Wingers, I was a bit more surprised because, we do have options there. I'm not surprised he's looking for a striker, because the way we play, someone of Davis's stature and style is pivotal to that. But as I said, the thing that will be interesting over the next 2 or 3 weeks is to see if if you take Slaven's list of midfielders, wingers, and a striker as almost a shopping list. It'll be interesting to see how many of those get ticked off by the owner and his recruitment team, because if the manager doesn't get what he's looking for, then obviously he will feel that he's been shortchanged or that he's going in under-equipped. But the thing that's hard to judge is how many of those positions will be filled by people who are coming back in terms of, the players that are injured, because what you don't want is to go and sign 2 midfielders and then have 2 spare midfielders because all the other ones are fit. So I suppose these are all the different elements that the coach and the owner are all discussing. But, if you said to me, what would I think is priority? I'm listening to the manager because I have nobody else to listen to. The owner doesn't speak. I think you have to be fair and say that Ben Manga's arrived, but to expect him to be able to hit the ground running and bring in players, he's only been here a couple of weeks officially, even with the best will in the world, that's asking a lot of anybody. So you'd like to think that whatever players we bring in, that some prep work had been done before we were expecting Manga to do it. It wouldn't be fair on him. So, I think that's the only thing we've got to go on is what the manager said. And he said wingers, midfielders and a striker. So if we end up with 3 goalkeepers and a centre-half, then, it's going to be completely at odds with what
I wouldn't rule it out with Watford, to be honest with you.
Well, I'd like to think, that there must be a reason that we've brought in someone who's got a very good track record in recruitment. It just frustrates me that I can't ask the owner what the plans are or what his thinking is behind that. So the only person I've got to talk to really is the head coach. He said wingers, midfielders and the striker. So that's what I'm basing my thoughts on. If on Friday he says, well, actually, we've got to think about it and we need a left back, then that will be what I go on. But you can only really go on what people tell you. My guess of what, my thoughts of what we need and yours are as valid as anybody's. But at the end of the day, the managers are more valid than all of us. So in lieu of the owner telling us what he thinks he's going to go and get, I'm basing my assumptions on what the manager said.
And from your interactions with Slaven, is it fair to say that should the end of the window happen and we don't do the recruitment, that we want to see that he'll be quite honest in expressing his feelings? He comes across as quite a direct, honest guy, and he's not afraid to say what he thinks.
He's nobody's fool, and it's not like we're talking about somebody who would be worried that if he was to be too outspoken, it might interrupt his career, because he's had a pretty good career anyway. I don't think he's going to set out to fall out publicly with anybody. But if you're right, if we get to the end of the window and we haven't signed any of the players in the areas that he suggested we need them, and someone asks him a question, he will give a decent answer to it. He's not going to pull any punches. In the same way that he said after the Reading game that he was now looking for answers on what keep happening with injuries. He's tolerant to a point, but he's also got a job to do. And he's working within a framework at Watford that's a little bit different to what he's used to. But if come February the 1st, he thinks we've been left short, I don't think he's the sort of person who's going to fudge answering a question about that. So, I think I think it's been really fascinating, because there hasn't been, in the last 10 years, we haven't had many managers of the same stature as Slaven Bilic, who are also quite as open as Slaven Bilic. And also, in most cases, when we have had someone, they've been so far towards the end of their career that you had to question what was motivating them. Slaven's in the middle of his managerial career. So, he is going to want to do what's good for Watford, but also what's good for him. I don't think for 1 minute, if come February the 1st, he's not happy, that he will, hold back. He may not be as open publicly as he is privately, but he's not the sort of person who's going to, skate around the edge of it.
No, of course. We were going to touch on it later on, but just now, the fact that you touched on potentially speaking to Gino Pozzo. A question here from Ryan. We know that you've asked to speak to Gino. Do we have any updates on that, whether it's going to be possible at all? What have you heard from the club? Do you think we'll hear from Gino anytime soon?
No, is my honest answer to that. Have I asked? I've seen the question pop. Have I asked for one? It's an open request. When I started back in the summer, I was very fortunate to get access to Scott Duxbury, who's been excellent with me. I've had great access to Rob Edwards and to Slaven and to the players. The only person I've not had access to is the owner. I've asked politely. I've said that, I'm happy to travel anywhere. The only stipulation I've had is that it has to be an interview. It can't be him giving me a load of statements that I just, trot out parrot fashion, because that's propaganda. So I would want to ask questions. Now, whether that puts him off, I don't know. I don't know what he thinks I'm going to ask because I've never shown him, which is another thing I'm not really keen on doing, which is asking people or showing people what I want to ask in advance. That's not an interview, So, no, I at the moment, there's no sign of it. And the only message I've got is he doesn't feel the need to do it. So take into that what you will, I think it's a shame. He doesn't owe me anything at all personally. I'm just pitching the request for an interview on the basis that the fans haven't heard from him for a long time, other than some short statements, which are fine. But again, how can an owner put a statement out and then not allow himself to be questioned on it? That really isn't how I see communication working. It has to be a two-way thing. You have to be able to cross-examine and ask supplementary questions, because when you get an answer to a question, that may lead to another question. So that's what I'd really like to do, is to sit down and just probe a few things. And, if he doesn't want to answer a question, that's fine. As long as I can report that it was asked, the fact that he doesn't want to answer it can often be as revealing as, a fluffy answer that says nothing. But yeah, so I would still happily go interview Gino Pozzo at any time. Do I think it'll happen? No, probably not.
I know we've got some more questions from people on Twitter and Instagram, but just back to the transfers quickly and more kind of outgoings. There's been a few rumours about Matty Pollock leaving on loan, and also Courtney House, who might have his loan terminated, has been reported. Nothing official yet. Do you know anything more on those two?
So with the Courtney Hawes one, or Howes, I'm not quite sure you say it, my understanding was that was a season-long loan without a break clause. And if that's the case, then Watford don't have the option to terminate. So you would then be into a situation where you would have to go to Manchester, to Aston Villa and say, look, we want to send him back. And they could agree to that. What they may then say is, well, because you had him on a season-long loan, you can send him back, but you're still going to have to pay his wages. So then you're almost going cap in hand and saying, well, look, we were paying, and I don't know what percentage of his wages we were paying, but the fact that you're sending him back suggests you don't really want to be paying that. But Aston Villa, if they're not feeling benevolent, could turn around and say, well, you knew that when you took him on. So there is always that issue that even if you send him back, it's going to cost you his wages anyway. Is it worth having him around if he can't play? Probably not. As Slaven said the other week, there's obviously been a difference of opinion. The player feels he needs surgery. The club's medical team and others feel he doesn't. And that's sort of the on-pass that we're left with. But it means that, the chances of him playing for Watford again this season are very low. And in lieu of the fact that we can't, as I understand it, just terminate the loan, we're in that position where, do we want to send him back? Probably. Do we want to pay his wages when he's back? Probably not. It's all a bit messy. So I don't quite know how that one's going to end up. And I think that's why Slaven said himself, he doesn't quite know how it's going to go, because in some loans you have a break clause, in some loans you don't. And it seems in this one, there's no break clause. So it's then down to almost can we negotiate something with Villa? Matty Pollock, I asked someone at the club today about loans, and it was news to them, but it wasn't something that was dismissed. It wasn't a case of that won't happen. It was more that they had nothing to tell me at the moment. It's an area where I know Slaven Bilic feels that at the moment, and I'm touching wood when I say that, but at the moment we've got good numbers. You've got 4 or 5 players that can play in central defence, and Pollock would be towards the end of the list. So if they all stayed fit, then he might not get much time. It strikes me that he's a player who does need some game time. Sitting here watching in the stands for half a season isn't very many people. But the other thing is, the way things are for us, you send him out on loan. 3 weeks later, you lose 3 centre halves, we calling him back again. But I've not heard that he's going anywhere. But it would make perfect sense, given that he does seem to be sort of 5th in the list of 5.
Course. And moving on to some questions we got from on Twitter this morning from Watford fans. Thank you everyone who sent in a question. Just to kick things off on the theme of outgoings, this question from Rasmus Axelgaard. What's the plan with Ismaila Sarr at the moment? Do the club want to keep him? Is Sarr looking for a move away? How much would it be for the club to accept a deal from him? What do you know about Sarr at the moment?
I'm pretty certain he's not agitating for a move. He didn't agitate for a move in August, to be fair, but an offer came in from Villa that was deemed acceptable, and he was on his way as far as I was concerned. And then it turns out that Steven Gerrard had a change of mind, didn't fancy him. So Sarr stayed, and both Edwards and Bilic have gone to great lengths to say Sarr's caused no problems. Sarr's not someone who's kicking off. He was not one of those who was, in sort of the negativity club of last season. He's always been Sarr calls him a good boy. And, he's shy and he's quiet, but he's not disruptive. I've not heard that we want to sell him in this window. And I think the fact that you're minus João Pedro makes selling him seem harder, because you've got one injured and one sold player who are your two sort of potential game changers. But then again, with only 18 months to run this contract, if someone came in with an acceptable offer, it might make sense financially to let him go, as long as that money would be reinvested. And I think what people sometimes overlook is that there is a hole in the budget at the moment, because the club would have, or did in the summer, plan to sell one of either Pedro or Sarr. They obviously thought Dennis would go, and he did. But I think there's a hole in the budget that would sort of be filled by either a transfer fee for Sarr or for Pedro. So at the moment, if Sarr were to go, it would be foolish to expect every penny that came in to be reinvested, because that money was always sort of seen as, business as usual sort of money. It's what you need and to keep the club ticking over. And people will say, yeah, but we parachute money. I know from my time in football, revenue goes down when you go in the Championship. Everything reduces. Even though your players take a wage cut, you're still far, far short of what you were. And, the fact that we've still got Pedro and Sarr here means that we're a transfer fee down and probably a salary up, if that makes sense. So I think it would. I'm just assuming that Pedro had been fit. I think it would have been more likely that Sarr might have been sold in this window. Now that Pedro's out and he's going to be out for a while, if we are going to go up, we are going to need a match winner. With every week that goes by, you've lost Pedro, then you lose Davis. You almost feel like, rather than sell Sarr, we should wrap him in cotton wool and only let him out on Friday mornings, because he is, the player that when his name appears on a team sheet, the other team are scared. Nearly every manager that has done a press conference this year has talked about Sarr and Pedro. They're scared of them. Whether Sarr performs on the day or not, that he's filled a lot of their training time in the week trying to work out how to deal with him. So, in answer to your question, I think the prospects of him being sold now are lower than when Pedro was fit. But football's a business. If someone came in with the right sort of money with 18 months left to go on his contract, we could be in one of those horrible positions that on the last day of January, someone suddenly pops up and then, you've no time to do anything about it. But I've seen these stories that we're interested in a swap for Dennis, and I would be amazed if that happened for a number of reasons. But no, I cannot see that one happening. I'm sure that Dennis's agent would love that. And he's one of the best agents. He keeps his player, gets him loads of coverage. And I just refer to what I've said to people before. I've sat on both sides of the fence. And if you're working for a club or you're working for a player that wants to move, there is nothing to stop you picking up the phone to your friends in the media and saying, look, my player's interested in going to insert name of club, even if that club have got no idea or intention of signing him. It's just a way of keeping your player's name in the press, and it alerts other clubs to the fact that Nottingham Forest may be prepared to let Dennis go. I don't think a Dennis Sarr swap is going to happen. So no, I'd rule that one out totally. I think the return of Dennis is extremely unlikely. Extremely unlikely.
You're going to upset Sam now.
well, I mean, what you have to remember is, and I'm sure you can read between the lines, but what a player does on the pitch is one part of what they bring to a club. But you've also got to look at what they do in the dressing room, how the other players feel, their character, their personality. You all read that. I'm sure you read what Dan Gosling said. And if you look back to last season, from the point we got relegated or relegation was confirmed, Dennis didn't play another game. Now, if you look at some of the things that were said about players towards the end of last season and the fact that Dennis suddenly disappeared, you don't have to be Einstein to work out that maybe he didn't fancy playing anymore once we'd gone down. And what does that say to the club? What does that say to the other players? I think you have to remember that as much as he was an excellent player on the pitch, we got good money for him. And I would, as I say, I'd be amazed if he came back. I might be wrong, but I'd be amazed if he came back under any circumstances.
Yeah, it was a good deal for us in the end, wasn't it? Big profit made.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's a very good deal.
Yeah. We're just throwing these questions at you. We've had so many sent in, so really appreciate it.
Yeah, no trouble.
Tell us to stop or throw some back at us if you want. But Matt Goom on Twitter says, has Andrew heard any more on the internal media team investigation? The meeting Bilic suggested. Obviously, we spoke about injuries and does seem a recurring theme. And I don't know if it's something that the club are kind of taking a step back and looking.
You said media team. I take it you mean medical team.
I did mean medical team. Sorry.
No, I was just trying to think what the internal meeting with the media team was, because that you've probably just caused about 8 people who work in the Watford media team to mess themselves because they're thinking of facing up to Slaven Bilic. If Slaven said in more than one interview after the game at Reading that he would want answers and it would be discussed this week. I haven't spoken to him since then. I'll speak to him on Friday, but he's a man of his word. It will definitely be something that he's looked at. If you look back over recent interviews, he's talked about a lot of things. It's not just are the players warming up properly. He was questioning himself. Am I doing the right sort of training? Am I asking too much of them? Are we doing too much training, not enough training? Are we doing enough in the gym, not enough in the gym? He referred to, the game at Norwich. If you look at the way Keenan Davis played, he almost played a Keenan Davis role and added in the João Pedro role at the same time. He was coming back, getting the ball, running 50 yards, often with 2 of their centre-halves hanging off each shoulder. I'm not saying that's the reason he got injured, but it isn't going to help. Same with Kabasele in that game, was almost playing as a centre-half, but also a bit of a wing-back, covering more ground than he would normally do. He drops down with a hamstring injury. It's not a defence. It might be an explanation. I think what was harder for Slaven and for the rest of us is to see a player come on as sub and then go off after 5 minutes. That would be what you'd expect to happen if I came on as sub, but not if you send on someone who's a professional footballer who should have warmed up. Now, I didn't sit and watch the players at halftime. I don't know what sort of warm-ups they did or how much stretching they did, but you could tell after that game, and I think I tweeted about it, his body language, his demeanour. He's very good at answering questions, but he's also very good at giving off a lot in the way he interacts with you. And that wasn't faux anger. That was, I'm reaching into my tether now and I need some answers. But he's also said he's not expected to be one answer. It's not like someone's going to say, well, if you stop doing that or if you do this, everything will be fine. It's an amalgamation of various things that he thinks, are causing it, both at the training ground, players at home. He said, even if a player, is having a bad time at home or feeling miserable, it doesn't translate into an injury, but it does affect the way they perhaps train or they warm up. So in lieu of there being a silver bullet that can be fired, I would assume from what he said on Saturday that he would have met with his medical people this week. He would have met with the players that are injured. And then we'll find out more on Friday. But, I spoke to Mario Gaspar today, and one of the things he said in English was, he's amazed at what's happened. He's never seen anything like it. So it is unprecedented. Is it bad luck? Yeah, there's a bit of that, I'm sure. But I think what Slaven wants to look at now is the things that they can do to make a difference. Because while you can't totally stop injuries, there are obviously things you can do that minimise the risk of so many of them that are so bad.
No, of course. And you just mentioned that Mario Gaspar interview. Andrew, when will that be out?
It's out. It's done.
It's out.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. So go check that out after.
He's a very nice bloke. Really good laugh. Very humble. Interesting to listen to. Spoke a little bit of English. Had a good laugh. Said that he's only ever going to play for teams that wear yellow because he likes yellow, although he does like the black and white away kit. It's a good read. We're slowly working my way around to have done hopefully all the players at least once by the end of the season, because I think, as a fan, that's the sort of thing I'd like to read. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Good stuff. And just before we move on to another fan question, just going to address this from Stephen Pritchard. 2 litres a day. That's why the water bottle is so big. So can't state how important that is. So get yourself a 2-litre water bottle. But going back to the fan questions, there was a rumour today in the Telegraph on Watford wanting Man United winger Facundo Pellistri on loan for the rest of the season. Do you know if there's any truth in this, and how good of an addition would it be?
What I would say is I think that story was written by Jason Burt at the Telegraph, and Jason Burt is probably the journalist that's closest to Bilic. They've had a relationship for many years. I imagine that goes right back to when he was playing at West Ham and Everton. On the day that Bilic was unveiled to the press, Jason Burt was there. He's been to training a couple of times. He would be very close to Bilic. Now, I'm not saying for 1 minute that Bilic has said, "Oh, by the way, Jason, I'm signing this player," or "I want to sign this player." But if anyone's going to know what Bilic is thinking, it will be Jason Burt. Because he also knows Bilic's agent. He knows a couple of his coaching staff. So if I was going to say a person would know whether something was right or not when it comes to Bilic's thinking, then it would be Jason Burt at the Telegraph. So that makes me think there is something in this. Now, whether that's a genuine that Burt knows that Bilic has told him he likes that player, or that Burt was at the game last night, because I know the player played last night and happened to spot someone that he knows that Bilic uses for scouting in the crowd. It could be that the player's agent knows Jason Burt and wants to get him a move so he gets some first-team football in the second half of the season. But of the rumours I've seen, that's the one that made my ears prick up when I saw or heard that it was Jason Burt that had written it, because he's someone that I've known down the years, and he certainly knows Slaven Bilic and his agent very well. So, might just be there's things that go on. If you're a manager and you want to sound the waters out, but you don't want to do it personally, you get someone to tell a journalist that you're quite interested in a player at a certain club. That journalist then runs a story for you, and then that club has to sort of confirm or deny, or no, he's not going out on loan. But instantly that story appeared. I then saw other stories that the player's agent was trying to secure his client a move for the second half of the season. It sets off, it's like dominoes. Once that first domino's flicked, others happen. So this could have come from Bilic, could have come from a friend of the player, could have come from the player's agent. But the fact that Jason Burt's involved gives it far more credence than most other rumours. And the fact that he's a winger. Going back to what we said earlier, Bilic would like a winger. There's a winger. He's already in England. He's an international. Would he be a good addition? Well, you could say anyone would be a good addition at the moment. We're so short, but he fits what Bilic said he wants. It would make sense. Have I heard anything more than that? No, not going to lie. I've only heard and seen what everybody else has. But the only thing I can bring to it is that because Jason Burt's written the story, it feels a lot more credible.
Yeah, it's interesting. He came on last night. He got an assist for Rashford. I was surprised to see he featured 3 times at the World Cup, didn't he? Starting twice for Uruguay. Still a young player, playing on the right wing, even though he's right-footed, which I found quite interesting, which is quite rare nowadays.
Yeah.
Quite dynamic, tricky, confident. Man United fans seem to love him at the moment. So,
well, he's the sort of player. Bilic talks a lot about when players move to England. You've got to give them time to settle in. Whereas here's a player that's already been in England, and it's not like he's going to move country. That's one of the big challenges for people like Kone and Martins. You're not just moving club, you're not just moving country, moving continent, and that it's a big change. I mean, when I spoke to Gaspar today, he talked about the fact he'd never trained in snow, and he's only from Spain. You imagine the change coming from Brazil as a 20-year-old to England. You only have to remember that the João Pedro that we saw when he first came is nothing like the João Pedro we've got today. He was good then. Yeah. So the benefit of a player that's at Manchester United would obviously be that you don't need that settling in time, because he's had 6 months of being in England, knows what it's all about. So but as we all know, what you want and what you get are often 2 different things. But as I say, with Jason Burt being involved, that feels like there could be something in that.
I'm quite interested. A lot of what you're talking about in terms of the involvement of Bilic in recruitment, which maybe from down the years wasn't so much the case. If you saw the Pozzos and the head coach wouldn't have so much say in. And I saw last night Matheus Pereira, who used to play for West Brom under Bilic. Apparently, there's rumours he's looking for a move. don't really want to. You probably don't know specifically on the player, but do you think Bilic has got more of a say in recruitment than previous head coaches?
If I'm being honest, no, I don't think he has. I think he'd like to have, but it's not the way that Watford have worked, and it's not what It's not like it's going to come as a surprise to Bilic. He would have known how Watford operate when he joined, and he's never said he's taken a job and then been brought in under false pretenses. The way Watford like to operate is they have a team of recruiters and they have an owner who has networks and they find players. I think what will disappoint Bilic is if, having said that he feels we need players in certain positions, that we don't then fill those positions. I don't think anybody who's head coach at Watford can expect to bring in players that they name. So it's not like going to say, I want to sign that player, and the club go and sign that player. I think the way Watford operate is the head coach will say, I feel we need this type of player in this position. And then if everyone agrees, then the recruitment team go off and come back with some options, and they will discuss them and go and get the one they think is right. I watched a Netflix documentary about Tottenham, the one that goes behind the scenes, and it was an eye-opener to me because things had changed. Because when I worked at Watford, Graham Taylor, Luca Vialli, Ray Lewington, they would go and identify players themselves. They'd bring a name, the club would go and negotiate with that player. When I watched that documentary and Mourinho said he wanted a certain type of midfielder, the next thing I saw, he had like a folder of paper and there were 6 or 7 sort of player profiles, a bit like you do on, Championship Manager. And then he would say, yeah, I don't like that one, don't like that one. And they'd rule it down, narrow it down to 2, but that would be his input. And then that was as far as it went. And so it's not like the days of a manager going standing on the terraces on a Tuesday night, spotting a player, signing him. That's changed. So I don't think Bilic came here thinking he was going to be controlling transfers. I think what will disappoint him is if he's not listened to. And I think, I'd be disappointed by that as well, because then what's the point of having a head coach? Why have someone in that position who's got footballing knowledge and has performed well? You may as well put anybody in that position and then let the recruitment team just sign players. So I think he has to be listened to. I hope he's listened to, and if he's not listened to, then I think he'll have his say. But it's no surprise. I don't think he's got any more input than anybody else. I think Rob Edwards had the same sort of level of input, and I think every manager that's come here has had that same sort of level of input. That's the way the Pozzo model operates. And for the first 6 or 7 years here, you could have no complaints. It's only been the last 2 or 3, maybe 4 years where, you start to question, well, why haven't we signed a defender? Why don't we pay money for defenders? Why do we keep signing players that we don't seem to need in positions where we seem to be strong? That's maybe where it's fallen down a little bit. But I don't think Slaven or any manager comes to Watford and thinks, I'm going to sign exactly the player I want. And why would they? Because the Pozzos would say, well, it worked for us at Udinese, it worked for us at Watford, it'll work for us again.
No, of course. And just last question before we move on to Charlie's agree to disagree. I've seen that, you've been on, for example, Do Not Scratch Your Eyes, where you hear so many sort of different opinions from fans, the great Twitter spaces they do after games. And a question from Joe Legg on Twitter. If we fail to sign any players that would improve the team this window, do you think the fan discontent over the Pozzos will spill over into protests? Because we have, I mentioned Do Not Scratch Your Eyes because we've heard on there before people saying that they were going to go and protest and banners and that sort of thing. But we haven't actually seen too much of it. Do you think that we could see a change after this January transfer window if Slaven Bilic isn't backed?
I don't think so. No, I think if there was going to be protest, I think towards the end of last season, when things were horrendously bad and we'd lost, every home game, for months on end, if that didn't provoke something, I don't know what will. And I'm torn. I don't like the idea of things being forced through by brute force and storming the boardroom. But then similarly, I think sometimes it doesn't hurt the people that run the club to understand the depth of feeling and the emotion that football brings to people. Because what I always come back to is that the fans who've supported the club before the Pozzos are the ones who will support the club after the Pozzos. The Pozzos are just custodians of the club. So while it's their money and they can run the business how they see fit, I think it wouldn't hurt for them to understand what it means to the fans in the stands. And that comes back to why won't they answer questions? Why won't they speak to us? It does smack a little bit of sort of some ignorance and a little bit of cowardice that, that they're happy to take a slap on the back, but they won't take a direct question. So if we had a bad window, I'm sure there'd be some very angry people, but I don't think we'll get protests. It's been very rare at Watford down the years. We're not that sort of fan base. We're sort of a nice, sort of home counties, mild-mannered people who, tend to tut louder if things go wrong. And I wouldn't want to see people, outside the ground with protests, but I could understand why people would feel that way. And if they do feel that strongly, then all I hope is that they do it, in a constructive way, and that it gets the point across, because that's what the owner needs to understand is if we do have a bad window and we do struggle in the second half of the season, then it's a very important thing to a lot of people. Watford Football Club and watching football in general is something that people use as an escape from life, or it's their focal point for the weekend. It's how they choose to spend their money, and it does mean a lot to a lot of people. So I would understand why people would get angry, but I don't think it will happen. And I don't know that it would make a great deal of difference. I wish, that we could have some constructive dialogue with the owner sometimes, but that's not going to be the case, as I said earlier. Do I think he'd be bothered by a protest? Don't know. Do I think it will happen? No. Do I think we'll have a bad window? I'm not going to be that negative. We'll see in 3 weeks' time. We've made 2 or 3 decent signings so far. Manager's set out what he thinks we need. It seems like, there's all the pieces in place, but transfer windows are notoriously difficult things to navigate. So let's see what happens. But I really hope that we don't even need to worry about that in 3 weeks' time. I hope we've had a good window. I hope we've got the players on board, and I hope we crack on the second half of the season and go up. But as I say, I can understand why people would be hacked off if by the end of the window we haven't got what we think we needed.
Yeah, let's stick with the positivity. A quick one to end it. We've only got a couple of minutes. I really appreciate your time, Andrew, but agree to disagree. So I'm going to read out a couple of statements. You just need to say whether you agree or disagree and elaborate on why. So the first one, and I know you kind of have been working alongside both of them, Rob Edwards and Slaven Bilic, but the statement is Slaven Bilic was a better appointment for Watford in the long run.
Yeah, agree. I thought Rob was the right appointment if the club had been fully behind the reason for appointing him, which was they wanted a young manager that was going to be there a long time. The fact that we changed manager 10 games in suggests that maybe they weren't quite as committed to that in the long term. So, yeah, I think probably, Bilic was the right appointment for what Watford wanted to do. They just didn't have the patience to stick by Rob. We'll never know if he would have turned it round, but the results have been better under Bilic with the same group of players, minus several who've been injured. So, yeah, I think, sadly, as much as I liked Rob, I think probably Bilic was the right appointment at the right time.
Okay, next one. Ben Manga will be a success at Watford.
Ooh, that's really hard. I'm only allowed agree or disagree.
Yep.
I'll go agree because his records suggest that he should be. You can't deny what he's achieved in Germany. And some of the players he's unearthed, I think he's called the Pearl Finder in Germany. And, that suggests that he really does know where to look. My only caveat is that he's only been here 3 weeks and, he's come to England, which is very different to Germany. And I don't know how much he knows about what's required in the domestic game. He doesn't need to know English players as much as what it needs to be successful in English leagues. But everything points to him being good at what he does. And the other caveat would be that he's allowed to work in conjunction with the manager rather than instead of the manager. So he needs to listen to the manager's input as much as the owner's input, and then they can work together as a team.
It's going to be fascinating. See, and last one, Watford will get promoted this season.
I'll agree. How can you stand to say anything else?
Nothing but positivity, Andrew. Come on.
But look, I think I look at the table and I think, okay, Burnley and Sheffield United look a long way clear. Yeah, they do. We've beaten both of them. We didn't realise how good those wins were at the time, but they look really damn good now. I can't believe both teams can go through the second half of the season without some sort of bump in the road, without some sort of hiccup. We've got to play both of them. I mean, I'm focused on Sheffield United. If we were to beat Sheffield United, suddenly they're back in range. They've still got to play Burnley again. I think we can do it. Your gut says, yeah, your head says it's going to be through the playoffs. To me, I don't care how we go up. I don't care. I'm not one of those people who says, well, if we go up, we're going to get thrashed and we're going to come back down. I'm a believer in you've got to aim to be the best you can possibly be. And if that means that we sort of bounce up and down for a while, then so be it. If we go up and do a Brentford or a Brighton, brilliant. But surely we want to be at the best level we can be. Rather than being the big fish in the small pool. I'd rather be a small fish in a big pool and achieve to be, or aspire to be, the big fish in the big pool. So yeah, we're going up.
Wise words, Andrew. And just a couple of things too as we wrap up the video. Charlie, do you want to mention this week's Watford Twitter Spaces?
Yeah, we've got a Twitter space with the club tomorrow at 7:00. It's a Graham Taylor match day special. We're going to have Nigel Gibbs back on, and we're going to have Roy Moore back on, talking everything Graham Taylor. So we'd encourage everyone to get involved. Tell us all your stories about Graham Taylor and what he meant to you. It should be a good one ahead of Blackpool on Saturday.
Good stuff. And talking of the Blackpool game, Andrew, could we get a score prediction from you, please?
I'm trying not to think of that miserable afternoon in Blackpool. I actually think them beating Forest does us a favour, because that means they've got another cup title to look forward to. They will have expended energy. I'll go 2-0. 2-0 us. Look, if we're going to go up, without being disrespectful to Blackpool and Rotherham, we got to win the next two games. Don't win those two, then it really brings into question what I said earlier. And I don't mean that to be disrespectful to Blackpool. They beat us soundly at their place. But if we are going to get anywhere near promotion, then you've got to be winning those home games.
Thank you so much for your time. I feel like we could be here all day talking about what.
That's a pleasure. No trouble at all. Anytime.
And apologies if we didn't get onto your questions today. Andrew, we'd love to have you back on again, and we'll take even more questions.
Anytime. I'll try and do shorter answers next time.
Oh, don't worry about it. Make sure to go and check out the Andrew's recent interview with Mario Gaspar on the Watford Observer. Make sure to listen out for Charlie's Twitter Spaces with the club tomorrow night. Make sure to like, subscribe to WD18, and we'll be back for another video after the Blackpool game. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you soon. Come on, Yawns.